Good evening, everyone.
Hi.
Good evening, and thank you for having me.
We are so excited.
So hello everyone watching from Facebook, and hello everyone watching from our YouTube, and everyone watching from Twitter. We're absolutely excited for this conversation today. I mean, I feel like the stars aligned because August in South Africa, we celebrate Women's Month. And, we have a really great South African literary icon, Mayor Sindiwe Magona, who's going to join us to speak about her latest novel, When the Village Speaks. But I will give Alma, just the welcoming, the privilege of welcoming our esteemed author this evening.
Sure, thank you so much. I have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Sindiwe Magona, who is an author, storyteller, motivational speaker, poet, playwright, and actor. She's received numerous literary awards, as well as awards in recognition of her work around women's issues, the plight of children, and the fight against apartheid and racism. Dr. Magona recently received the Ellen Kuzayo Award, as well as her third honorary doctorate from the Nelson Mandela University. She lives and works in Cape Town and is the author of When the Village Sleeps, which is the novel that we will be discussing today. So welcome, Dr. Magona. We're so excited.
Thank you. Just to add a little note, last month I received my fourth honorary doctorate from Fort University. I must mention Fort. I mean, honestly.
That's absolutely fantastic. Four honorary doctorates. Oh, we have to stand. There's no way we have to stand. Magona, I keep referring back to my children's children and thinking about just the starting line of my children's children, right? And I kind of have this question out of curiosity. I mean, when you wrote the book, right, you were thinking about we may not live enough, and ours is a tradition of oral history. And so I want to write these words in order for you to look to them, because I want you to know how I lived when I was younger. Reflecting back on writing the book and knowing that your children's children are able to still drink from the well of your knowledge, how do you think about that book now that you are able to tell them got word of mouth and they can also read it?
I feel singularly fortunate that I dared write the what will probably end up being the first part of my autobiography. I didn't think I was going to live this long. When that book came out, I was almost 50 years old. And I wrote everything I knew. I'm not I didn't study writing. I write just, as I say in the book, this is my way of living word of what it was to be an ordinary, almost painfully ordinary child, South African, black or Bantu, as the classification went those days. Because as a child, one cannot escape being marked by your surroundings. We are all born equal. Yes, human beings are born equal. But from the moment we are born, we are classified by where we are born, who gives birth to us, their situation. Whether you like it or not, you become what your immediate environment and capacity of the people who gave birth dictate. You cannot escape that. So I grew up with this idea that I was okay until I ventured out of my little world. That's when comparisons start. Then you realize, how? Until other people don't live like me. I mean, the idea of every child going to school in shoes. Every child, every child, not just the child of the teacher or of the principal or the child of a mother who happens to be working for white employers and sleep in. who then give their child shoes, little things like that. And then as I grew older and wanted to write something, I thought, well, you start, because of course your environment also determines the kind of aspirations you may have. And of all the things that apartheid did to us, the one of making you believe you are nothing. Because once that belief is inside you, nobody needs to oppress you. You are doing it yourself to yourself, because you have so few aspirations. You don't believe you can amount to anything. And so when this idea began coming to me, then of course I stopped myself. Who are you to think you can write? You don't belong to any political organization. Who will say you gave you the permission to write about black people? As if I'm writing about black people when I'm writing about me. I don't even have the permission to write about me. I need permission from others, because our lives, where you live, where you work, the job you can do, and all the others you can't do, whom you can be in love with, all these were specified. But so now I start giving myself, barriers to what I can do, because that's the way I know how to negotiate life. And then, oh, but your parents are not involved in politics. What are you going to say? Oh, but your parents didn't go to school. Who do you think is going to read a book by you? By you? What have you got to say? Until I gave myself, through interactions with other people and encouragement, the permission to write about an ordinary person like me, who comes from nothing. And that's what I wrote. But to be fair, I didn't think, because people often, critics compliment me on my 2 books of autobiography, that because they're candid, they're honest. Well, I didn't think those books were going to be read by people who would look at me. So I had no sense of shame. I wasn't hiding anything. I was, when I say at the beginning of the book, to my children's children, I didn't mean my biological children, but I knew, I did some history, all systems, it doesn't matter how grand, how strong, they will finally come to the Roman Empire, that empire, they all fell in the end. Apartheid was strong. It looked as though it would go on and on. But I knew that eventually, I thought perhaps in 2,000 years. And then those people who go around, who go to university and study, and go around digging and finding old teaspoons that were used 1,000,000 years ago, they would find that that manuscript. That was the idea. I wrote for posterity, not you guys who can, how can Mam Sindiwe live like that and look at me trying to be somebody now? But thank God I wrote for posterity, and accidents deemed, or providence deemed that the book would see the light of day. Now, I wasn't planning on publishing. What did I know about publishing? Whom did I know who had ever published a book and looked like me?
I love that we're having that part of the conversation, because in many ways, in reading this book, I was also thinking about Beauty's Gift, right? And so much of this work is woman-centered, right? So this is woman-centered fiction. And I want to know why you felt that it was important to write woman-centered fiction. So you've spoken about telling stories that you didn't think that people would hear, but I'd really want us to expand a little bit on woman-centered fiction and why you think that is so particularly important for your writing and for the people who read your books.
I as I said, I don't come from great learning about writing, but my very first writers seminar, or whatever you can call it, conference, after I published To My Children's Children, I was schooled there. One professor, said towards the end of the day that although he applauded my contribution, but he said African women writers, black writers in this country, since we started writing way back in 1920 or whatever, this is 1990, hey? So this is within living memory. In 1990, only 5 women who looked like me had been published in South Africa. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and he could name them. Bononi Jabavu and others and others. 5, including Miriam Tlati. 5 women had been published. And then he went on to say, but this is true of all Africa, the whole continent. Women writers, black women writers, African women writers will write a book or two, mostly autobiography. And even if it's fiction, it will be autobiographical. Okay? Then they disappear. You know what? I made up my mind right there and there. I wasn't going to disappear. I wasn't going to write 2 books. I already had 2, because when To My Children's Children came out, it had been cut into 2. That's where forced to grow up. I had written that whole big thing as one, and the publisher then split it, and I had to find a way of wounding the one, completing it and then opening the other. And I thought myself, I'm not stopping at these 2 biographies. I'm going to write anything, says she who doesn't know anything. So I started writing. I would write anything and anything. I'll sit down and think this is fiction. Doesn't look like fiction. Then write short stories. Then write plays. Then write poetry. I write because I feel compelled to change that status. And I also wrote because until I was 30, I never held a book in my hand written by a black woman until I read Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. And then I thought to myself, at least, yes, she's not, but you know what I mean? She looks very close to what I look like. And so I thought, we can't write if we don't see people who look like us write. I have a statement I made, is written in, I think, in the book of poetry and elsewhere. I write so that children who look like me in the continent and elsewhere can see someone who looks like their mother and grandmother and aunt who does writing. I write so that women who look like me can write. It's not competition. It's kind of playing at being a role model, because whether we like it or not, we are all role models. As soon as you get to be bigger, the ones who are smaller than you look up to you and do as you do. Today, I don't know how many women who look like me write in South Africa. I've lost count. And I think, I'm not saying I made them do it, but I'm saying they grew up in an environment, writing environment, that's definitely different to what I was exposed to. People only do as people do.
I really love that, because I think in many ways what you're saying is that the only way we will make it in history is if we continue writing, and that's why you made the decision after 1990 to be like, I'm not going to disappear like all these women. And in many ways, I think that When the Village Sleeps gives us a glimpse of what you say, right? Because one of the key things that, or the key themes that we were really interested in when we were reading When the Village Sleeps, is this idea of communal responsibility. And just this idea of like the ways in which we as families fail our children. So we are complicit in a system that seeks to dehumanize Black people, especially as we see in the novel, the idea of dehumanizing the girl child and making sure that the girl child is like pushed to the fringes, because there are different standards that we give the girl child as opposed to the boy child. And I wanted you to speak a little bit about that, right? This idea of communal responsibility, or in fact, communal complicity in harming or ensuring that the girl child is not succeeding.
You know, nobody, wiser people, smarter people, more learned people have said this. Nobody can oppress you without your compliance. We are, because you know, I'm not saying oppression isn't real, but one transcends it. Whatever the situation is, especially when it's not one you enjoy, fight for you. Fight for yourself. Nobody's going to do it for you. And the girl child is trapped in societies such as ours in what is called tradition. And it's a painful thing to realize that men use tradition because it benefits them. And even a man who is not aware he is oppressive, he grew up in this setting. He doesn't view it as oppression. And when you point it out, say, but my father does it like that. And because your father did it like that doesn't make it God's law. You find professors at university who happen to be black, and you know, like me, really arguing about the fact that a woman is made for becoming a wife and childbearing. Say, where is love in this, in equation? What happens if you marry her and she cannot give you children, or you cannot give, because in the African sense, it's always the wife who is barren, it's never the husband. What happens you get married and there's no child? That's why we have this thing. What happens if it's you who can't give her a child? No answer. But the fact that you marry somebody till death do us part, but if there's no issue, you stop loving her? Where is love in this? That's why we there's this terrible word that has come to be associated with lobola. That's why we pay lobola. You don't pay lobola. Pay came with the coming of money into into our lives. You offer lobola. You don't pay lobola. You are not buying anything. You are offering that family who has raised this woman you want to make a wife, so that they offer in return their daughter to you. And Ubuntu had rules, regulations that were observed. Ubuntu, the premise, Ubuntu, rests solidly on the foundation of umntu ngumntu ngabantu. No one is bigger or better than the other one, not because they are male or female, no. And it is the more vulnerable who were protected by all the rules of Ubuntu. That lobola didn't give you the right to ill-treat anybody's child. They would go first their child. You know, now we have discarded the essence of tradition, but cling on to what suits us. Take an example that will make this clear. 2 examples. I can use the example of ukutwala. You understand ukutwala?
Yes.
Or
yes.
vaginal inspection. Those 2, they're both women. You see, today, because of apartheid, Africans will say that's tradition, and every white person claims. Because if they say anything against tradition, what's their name? You're racist. No, it's not tradition. Traditionally, if you had an eye for a woman, a young woman, you wanted to make her a wife, you didn't make her your wife until you got permission from the parents. You may have taken her without permission, but you wouldn't wife her. You wouldn't make her a wife. Ulalenai. Until you had gone and reported and be given permission. And no gray-haired man was going for a 12-year-old child. That is not tradition. Children were protected. Young women were protected. Sexuality was an open secret. Nobody hid youth. Youth sexuality was applauded in our traditional settings, but young people were schooled in ways of being together with no results. We discarded that, pursuing the Western ways, but we are not really there, are we?
Mm-mm.
We wouldn't be having all these children having children if we did. Vaginal inspection, you sis, okay? We don't examine why it was done. Then we are saying our forebears were all fools. That means we are the descendants of fools. If you examine what it meant safeguarding the maiden so that she would retain her maidenhood until such time as she became a wife, again protecting her children, what children she would have, to have them when the time and place was right. Okay, let's say now, okay, that's backward. That's we can't do that. We're civilized, we are westernized, we are Christianized. How many young people get to be 16 and 18 and they have not heard the word gynecologist? Do you take your little daughters to the gynae? No. That's the Western way. That's the Western way. By the time the child becomes a young woman, she's been to the gynecologist, and every year she goes, so that her womanly health, her woman health, is safeguarded. When she becomes sexually active, the mother says, "Hey, doctor, deal with this." We discard ours. We think we are westernized. We don't really know what the Westerners do. We are half and half, in between. We are neither this nor that. Our becoming westernized is not real, because we don't know what deep-seated beliefs those people built their own cultures that they are following. We abandoned ours for things we don't fully understand.
I want
Mina,
to talk.
sorry, you
Sorry,
go
Dr.
on.
Magona. I want to speak a little bit about, in line with what you've said about indigenous knowledge systems. I want us to speak a little bit about the exploration that you do in the book. So in the book, we see how Busi's family almost frowns upon Gogo's ideas or Maku's ideas around rites of passage and the way in which she feels that Busi needs to be inducted into becoming a woman, right? And we see the results of that. But we also see indigenous healing take place, or the use of indigenous knowledge systems as it relates to healing, because we see how Makulu, is Dr. Makulu still here? Yes. How Makulu then helps look after Mandlakazi, who's considered to be sick and unwell. And it's interesting to see the interplay of indigenous knowledge systems when ignored, but also when used for healing and for betterment. And I thought that there was an interesting commentary that was being made there about the sort of knowledge that our forebears have that often gets ignored because it's considered to not be sophisticated or not to be useful. And so I want to know, what was the purpose of including those two particular incidents in the book?
Which two particular incidents? Sorry, I got lost.
No, but
Makulu
no. So I mean,
helping.
Makulu,
helping.
Yes, Makulu, there's a rite of passage where Makulu wants to almost
Okay, and which is the other one?
And then you have Mandlakazi, who's born and she's not well because of all the things that Busi has been doing during her pregnancy.
Yeah.
And Makulu then takes Mandlakazi home,
to the village,
and there's a relationship with the land and with the herbs and the plants that Makulu uses.
Yeah. For me, writing the book is to show who we are and where we are and what we have left behind. To remind ourselves we are never alone. Africans believe this family throughout the continent. We believe in ancestry, not worship, but that as a human being, you are never alone. You are never alone. And if we instill this respect for who you are in totality, your family, the living and the dead, we wouldn't do, if we instill this in our children, we wouldn't do a lot of the things we do, a lot of the missteps we do. This belief, if you can think of, say, an aunt you loved who has gone, and you knew what she wanted for you, her wishes and hopes for you, you might work harder at school, thinking, oh, auntie, she must feel good I'm doing this. Auntie, I want her to look down and behave. You know, we have to extend our who-ness, ukuba sithi, our being, so that we realize how interconnected we are, both as living human beings now, but as we are in this realm at this time, and those before us and those who will come after us. We are linked. Each cohort of parents has an obligation. They receive something from the one, that gave birth to them. All the training, all the learnings, all the traditions, all the wisdom. Now theirs is to pass it on to the next generation. If this is not done, civilization as we know it would collapse. Because when we are born, we know nothing. We are born innocent of knowledge. All we know and all we will ever know comes from those around us. So they had better take that responsibility seriously. Knowingly and unknowingly, as a grown-up, you are always a role model to others. Therefore, it behoves all of us to always conduct ourselves in ways that are exemplary to the people who look up to us, whether we know them or not. How many times have you seen somebody, a dress they are wearing or a book they are reading, you don't know them, and admired it? And consciously and unconsciously, you take it in. That makes part of who you are. You see, COVID-19 now is reminding us of that. We are drinking in gems from people we thought were far away in China. What's China to South Africa, to Africa? But guess what? One world, one humanity, one race, the human race.
Dr. Magona, I wanted to speak about Makulu's friendship with her employer and wanted to think about power relations and friendships. I suppose the younger generation, as us, we're constantly going to say, we don't know if friendship can exist in that sort of subservient relationship. But I wanted us to speak a little bit more about that, about sort of, as you say, you write the book to sort of, tell us we've lost our ways. But I wanted to speak particularly, what was the commentary that you're giving us thinking about that friendship in particular? Because in the book, this friendship is like, it's a sisterhood, right? So these people see each other through losses of their husband. They connect. Even when she stops working and moves to the village, they still have a connection, And I wanted to talk about the idea of like friendship across race lines, but also across power dynamics, because Makulu is now befriending her employer, and your commentary around that.
This, you write about what you know is a common saying that I've come across as I keep on writing. And I worked as a domestic worker for 4 years. If you read Forced to Grow, you will grasp that. And I'd be lying if I said I had good relations with the women for whom I worked. However, as I grew both, as a human being in number of years, but as when I started branching out and growing out of my own ghetto and forming relationships with people differently classified, colored, Asiatic, white, I discovered that no, Ubuntu is not the sole, is not only owned by abantu abamnyama. Ubuntu comes in different skin color. It's not the color of a person's skin that makes them generous or mean. It is what is in the heart, what is in the mind, their spirit. And I got to know, I got to befriend, I got to be helped, especially when I was down and out, by women who were white. I have friendships now that go over 50 years now with some of those people. I have friendships with black women from sub B. And when I look at my friends, it is not their color skin. And I've written a lot about, the domestic worker and the madam. And it's not been complimentary most of the time. And I thought, for a change, let me show that, a white woman who employs a black woman can be a human being onobuntu, who has a good heart. And there can be a relationship. When I taught the only job I ever kept for 5 years, my last job in South Africa, I was teaching at a prestigious girls' school, private. Yeah. And, that's when things were beginning to change in the late 70s, early 80s. I left here and there were a few black children there in that school, and it wasn't cheap. It wasn't any old white person who could send their children there. And those children were there because their mothers were domestic workers and their madams sent their children there. And I know a woman, not a close friend, but in an organization, someone I know, who bought her maid long before we could buy immovable property in the urban areas. In the 80s, a flat in a white neighborhood. Okay, it wasn't in her name, but in her will, and her family knew that flat in which she lived there with her children, she was supposed to be caretaking. Nobody said you couldn't caretake and live on the premise, but that even if this woman died, eventually that she was never to be moved from that, and her children, if she died, would live there. So I've known this. This is something I have witnessed. And I thought, why not use it to show that we shouldn't condemn? There is no, the white people, just like when we were oppressed as black people, and all black people stink and all black people are thieves, I used to be very offended. There is, we not just because we wear this color skin, we are not all the same, are we? By the same token, with anybody, people are people inside differently colored skins.
I want to talk a little bit about the complex relationship that you showcase with aging in this book. So we see, and as a community, we see Umakulu have to flee her home in the village because there is this almost, which feels counterintuitive, right? For a culture which claims to treat old people with veneration, you see that there's a continuous dehumanization of older black women, right? So older black women will be accused of witchcraft. Older black women will really be continuously subjected to atrocities. And there's a commentary that I think you make about the loss of veneration for older people in our cultures, but also the ways in which Black women continue to be victimized even in their old age. And I wanted us to speak a little bit about what really is quite a disturbing phenomenon that you hear about constantly, and you see it almost happen to Makudu. So there's that community complicity that Etokonolo was speaking about as well. Because had she not been warned, I shudder to think what would have happened to her and her grandchild.
It really is a sad commentary on our inability to grow out of nonsense, leave behind what doesn't serve you, what doesn't grow you as a human being. How do you feel after you do that to another human being? Do you feel better? Do you feel taller? Do you feel that you are nearer to your God and to your ancestors? Really, this is something we all should be up in arms. I don't know what happened to this. Yeah, I watched something like this last year. Was it early last year? Somewhere, I forget where, in the Eastern Cape. A woman, an old woman, being dragged to her house by a relative and being put in there, and a young woman, your ages, pouring in, I think, something like petrol or paraffin. I mean, what do you think you are doing? And the pitiful cries, these women that came out of the pitiful cry, because he knew she was dead. Where is the rest of the township or village? When such things happen, they happen with our eyes wide open. When the village sleeps, that is what happens.
Waiting, when I was reading that part of the book, I was so mad because I was like, now she has to leave everything she has created for herself and go back to a place that, even in that place, she may be, it's precarious for her to live in a township where we've heard stories of older Black women who've been violated sexually and older Black women who've been killed.
Don't remind me, I was in France in June when I read in the news, where you see news on the top laptop, a 92 and a 75-year-old woman at Tsomo in the Eastern Cape were raped. The 75-year-old managed to escape. The 92-year-old was killed or died. Who rapes a 92-year-old? And it's not her age mate. It's not another 92. It's not her son. Is the son of her son. Is either her grandson or the son of her Amanyala. How do you go and rape a 92? But then, having said that, we are a nation that rapes babies in Layets. What is that? What is that?
I wanted to speak about sort of the idea of reproductive justice and access. So we do see that Busi, upon finding out that she is pregnant, sort of has to wrestle with this idea of what to do with the baby, because initially she kind of wanted the baby, but then when it happens, she's just like, I don't know. And I wanted to speak about like your commentary on the idea of like, we live in a democratic South Africa where we know that the idea is that people can get free access to abortions. But we know stories of young women who have gone to want to access these services and been chased away. And if they're not chased away by the healthcare workers who are at these the clinics and the healthcare provision, where they're also, are treated quite differently by their families. And I wanted to know what were some of the commentary you wanted to make around the idea of reproductive rights and particularly access to reproductive rights.
At any time when someone else usurps authority that should be yours, you are your own, and nobody should tell you what to do and what not to do. Anything and everything that happens to this body is your business and no one else's business. We come from a system that told us, do this, don't do this, and do this. That's one of the reasons I never, even if I could have, joined any political organization. The idea that I must be told, ordered, you can't say this, we must all agree. Even if I don't agree with the thing, we must speak with one voice. Where is my own faculty? Where are my faculties if I must just keep quiet so we can speak with one voice? When I see that this is wrong, I must have the right to dissent. The right to decide for me who is me and what I'm about should not be violated. What you're talking about, it ties in with this idea of you are just like vegetation or vegetable, a cabbage. Someone can buy you, someone can say, okay, go, I'll take another one. You are nothing. You are a soul. You are a soul and a brain. You should make your own, which is why, to come back to Kulu, children, both boys and girls, but we'll talk about the girl child because she's the one who carries the baby, should be taught self-respect and self-love so that they learn to look after themselves and they learn to do for themselves and they learn, the idea that is still pervasive to this day, unfortunately, that there will always be some men who will love you enough, love you forever, that they will look after you. We should scrap that out of our minds as women and our daughters. Be as big, as tall, as strong as you can be to look after yourself and whatever children you might decide to have, whether you are married or not married, because guess what? You may be more fortunate, wiser than me, and choose well when it comes to men and find a loving husband. But even good husbands die. Then what? When you decide to have children, it must be at a point where you are able to look after those children all on your own. If you have somebody helping you, call the husband, well and good, then the child has more. But if the husband disappears, you must be able to look after your child. Whether the person there pays non-support, you know what? Your child should be your business. It's okay to have a partner. It's lovely. Don't bank on it.
Speaking of children, I want to speak a little bit about Mandlakazi as a character. I found Mandlakazi to be quite intriguing. Her entry into the world is marked by a lot of conflict, a lot of unhappiness, but also Mandlakazi herself is a character who's quite interesting. She has a physical disability, but she's incredibly intelligent. She also has the ability to, in some ways, or she has supernatural powers that are also linked to her ancestors or to her ancestry. So it's also very spiritual. But Mandlakazi, without giving away too much of the book, Mandlakazi's character in the book and sort of the way that the book ends was a little bit disturbing for me as a reader. And maybe I'm just the eternal optimist and I just wanted things to be perfect. But I felt that Mandlakazi had such a difficult life. She had a difficult start. Mandlakazi's life also just revolved, like so many Black women's lives, around helping other people. And yet Mandlakazi doesn't necessarily get what she deserves. I don't want to give away too much of the book.
That's what you think. That's what you think. Wait for the sequel.
Okay,
I'll take that because I was happy with how Mandlakazi's story in the book progressed without giving away too much. And I want to know why you wrote Mandlakazi in the way that you did, because she had many facets to her. I mean, we see generational trauma, we see complex mother-daughter relationships, we see a physical disability. There are many things that Mandlakazi sort of overcomes, I suppose, if that's the word to use.
Can you see this part of the book?
Yes.
Did you read this part here?
Is this at the beginning, Mama?
Eh?
Is it to the community
Where
of
it says
Woodside?
part 1, the page which says part 1?
We don't have
Oh,
anything.
yes. Yes,
Now
yes,
read
yes.
the opposite at the top.
The writing of this novel was made possible by a bursary from the National Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences to do a PhD in creative writing at the University of Western Cape.
Ahaha. Ahaha. That answers. You know, if you do that kind of academic stuff, the sequel to this one will answer some of the queries you have.
Okay, I'll take that because I have many queries, Dr. Magona, about Mandlakazi,
But
right?
please, you know, write them to me, send them to me, it will help me.
But I think I'm interested in Mandlakazi's relationship with her mother, particularly with Busi, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I think that relationship is a site of redemption almost for Busi. So we see the mother-daughter relationship almost come full circle because there are ways in which Busi is humanized as a person outside of being mother that you do for her, and that also changes her relationship. And I want to talk a little bit about the mother-daughter relationships in this book and why it was important for Busi and Mandlakazi to have a redemptive arc, because there is a redemptive arc and there's a healing arc that takes place in that relationship.
Thank you very much. Because when I was planning the novel, I knew as I was looking at the characterization that Busi was going to be for me the most challenging. The most challenging. I didn't want it to end up. But
She
I
really
didn't
was.
want.
I felt like I needed to strangle her at some point to be like, Busi! Busi!
I didn't want it to end up being almost satanic. You know what I mean? So I thought I must find a way to salvage her. What better way than through the mother-daughter, especially as Mandlakazi is ancestral spiritual. And this also is a learning for all of us that I used to say when I was younger to friends, you know, the kind of friendship where you find friends have stopped talking to each other. I used to say, Mina, I don't care what I've done to you. If I didn't sleep with your husband, if you didn't go to the witch doctor and they said, I'm the one who murdered your child. Hey, what is it that we cannot talk through and forgive one another? Really, I didn't murder anybody in your family. I didn't sleep with your husband. Yinile that you cannot forgive. What is the word forgive? You're going to forgive me for doing right things. You cannot forgive me for little mistakes. I forgot your birthday. Wells, kill me.
I love what you're saying because I think that, and this book makes such a good example of the ways in which women are judged quite harshly. I mean, the book begins with Wusi being perpetually disappointed by her father, right? And there's a commentary about the perpetual disappointments that Black children are subjected to at the hands of fathers. You know, so I mean, yesterday I read an article about some ridiculous statistic of the number of Black children who are growing up in households where they may not have their father's presence, right? And we see that in the book as well. So Busi's story begins with the perpetual disappointed. You know, her father is just a perennial disappointment. You can rely on him to be disappointing. And that also sets the tone for some of the relationships. But there is a judgment reserved for the Black woman in this book that isn't extended to anybody else. And I think it's so important what you've just said, Dr. Magona, about holding Black women, particularly holding each other in forgiveness and in tenderness, right? So that the standard for Black women's behavior is not almost supernatural and you cannot be human, because in many ways you can understand why Busi behaves the way that she does. Busi is a child. She's a child in a dysfunctional environment that continuously strips her of her humanity, and she then goes on to also have a child who presents with with a disability, and what does that mean for the child that is Busi? And I think it's so beautiful that you wrote a healing and a redemptive arc for women
Thank
like
you.
Busi that we often
Thank
don't
you.
see.
Thank you. And look at, even when she's being helped by going to this better school, the Model C school, I mean, it hurts her. Because you are not just at that school. You have to come back to this rotten and go back there. You are judged differently. Yeah, it's very hard to be a child, And to meet, I did, not now during COVID. I like to work with young people, children and young people. And to us, a child you haven't seen for 3 or 4 weeks over December because, it's holidays. How was Christmas for you? And instead of the joy you want to see, the child starts, a whole river runs down her cheeks because the father didn't call her. He has another family in Gauteng. He had promised me to send me money. He didn't even call. And when I called, he had blocked my number. I mean, what is that? The woundedness in our children is beyond description. I don't have the words to the woundedness. How do you heal from that? How do you heal from being denied and discarded like so much garbage by the source of your life?
Yo, I'm saying pearls of wisdom tonight. Tonight. I wanted to speak a little bit about. I think there's an important commentary that is made around sort of how we understand the idea of capitalism and how capitalism has encouraged us to be these sort of individualistic people who only care about ourselves and care about our well-being. But what I think what the village, when the village sleeps, does really well is to remind us again that communal care is really a response to it's an anti-capitalist practice. It's saying that, in essence, what we need to do is we need to constantly be our brother, our personhood, and our sister's keeper. That I must be in your business in the way that you are in my business. And only when we are in each other's business are we able to rid ourselves of these, capitalistic notions of, you are each to their own and stuff like that. And I think the book really does an important commentary. We see this, as Alma mentioned earlier, when Makulu is warned, but we also see this when Busi comes about the idea of like the community girls who come and sit with her and help her, and how she also gives some of her clothes to this person, and how the girl who lives in the village is so grateful because she can have further clothing. But there's this idea of just like being in each other's business. I know Gwendolyn Brooks says a lot, we are each other's business, and I feel when
We
the village
are. We are. What is the point? Why would I want to have 1,000 pair of shoes when my sister is walking barefoot? Really, what does that say about me? If my mother's child is picking food from the garbage cans, and Mina, I breakfast on Kentucky and lunch on roast this, and I've turned vegetarian. I forget now. And when I hear such sickening statements, which are not in our language, remember that, as black tax. What is black tax? What is black tax? How do you translate black tax in ngesiXhosa, ngesiZulu, kaSiswati? What is black tax? And we should read the biographies of white people, some of them who came here as refugees from Hitler and other. Black tax? Black tax? You see how families helped one another. One brother or sister comes and they all live in one house, with 2 bedrooms, the girls there, the boys there, the father here, the mother. What is black tax? I grew up in an area where there were a lot of, all the shops, in fact, were either run by Indians or Chinese. You see a young man come, you could see he was poor. He works there. He works like a slave for a year or 2 or 3. You hear he has a shop somewhere. What is black tax? It's just another way of us finding a new way of oppressing ourselves. How do you grow when you don't help your own family? And then these are the people we think can help the nation. If you can have the heart that really frowns on helping your siblings, your immediate family, I have no hope you can help me.
Dr. Magona, I want to ask you what you hope that this novel will do. I mean, the title itself is quite intriguing. I mean, we often think of the village. We get told it takes a village, but the village is sleeping, and we see that the village is quite far from.
I'm glad you asked that question. I am hoping young firebrands such as yourselves are going to be the mandlakazis this country needs. People who have no vested interest in government, who will go community-wide and say, it's up to us. Don't blame the fools who have done wrong or misstepped. They also have a history. Make the world a better place than you find it. That's what we are. That's our mission in life. I am hoping this might spark a movement where people start thinking about what it is in our culture that we had. KwaZulu, they had amabutho. We let go of that, where girls and boys, according to age, were nurtured and made to grow in awareness of themselves and their obligation to the whole nation. They won't grow whole if we don't raise them. You want roses? Plant roses.
Dr. Magona, this has been a really powerful conversation. I think that it's often really important for us as young children to sort of have these intergenerational conversation, because we often come at a different angle than our older people. But I think what you really try to do in the book, When the Village Sleeps, is you calling us back to each other. You're saying that we are not so far from each other. We are quite near from each other. The systems that have been created to separate us, we are the ones who are able to.
Let's not allow it. Let us not allow it. And we, the older, must listen, because dialogue means listening more than blah, 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 listening. I want to hear your voice. I want to hear your views. And I want to really listen and digest, and then see why it is I don't see eye to eye with you, where I don't, so that I can grow. We must never, ever stop growing. And you won't grow if you don't listen. Listen and grow. Thank you for what you do. Thank you. I applaud you.
Thank you so much. And we're really excited about the sequel, because me and Alma, we're already there. We're going to jump in the email and be like, okay, Mandlakazi.
I need to know what happened with Mandlakazi. I need to know.
No, please don't. I want to hear from you. This is a relationship. And I must tell you now, it's not a secret. Some professor somewhere has started in 2 years, on the 27th, I'll be of this month. This is my birth month. I'll be 78. You know, my mother was giving birth to me during this month of Women's Month. Anyway, and then on the same, in 2 years' time, they want to celebrate my 80th throughout the month of August. But they want everybody who's had anything to do with my journey. So now we are getting added on the list.
That's really, really kind.
Thank you.
Again, thank you so much, Magona.
Thank you.
It's a really important us to continue to have these conversations. And thank you for just, opening yourself up in the way that you have. I think
No,
today,
thank you for knowing there is work to be done and being brave enough and having heart enough to do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And to everyone watching, please go ahead and get Dr. Magona's book. And if you want to get it from the Cheeky Natives, all you got to do is email info@cheekynatives.co.za, and we'll make sure that you get yourself a copy of When the Village Sleeps. Until next time, Cheeky Natives, thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.